Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. A very good afternoon to you all. Today we are going to discuss psychoanalytic literary theory, or in other words, we are going to look into literary criticism with the lens of psychoanalysis. Last week we looked at um, what was the topic we discussed last week. It was about feminism. Today we are going to talk about psychoanalytic literary theory. Uh, Today we enter perhaps the most controversial and fascinating framework, that is psychoanalytic framework. Some people think that Freud has been debunked and has been outdated, and in clinical psychology, much of his work has been, outdated. But as a method of reading texts, psychoanalysis remains extraordinarily powerful. We are not treating patients, but we are treating texts as if they have unconscious minds. So let's see how does it work. So today's lecture consists on these key points. Before starting that, I would rather ask you to, it's entirely up to you. You don't have to believe in Oedipus complex. I mean, Freudian theory. You just have to try on the method for a few minutes. I mean, this is a method which we use to understand literary theories. So you don't have to agree. You don't have to, believe in Freudian theory. But what is psychoanalytic theory? It's not just finding Freudian symbols in the text. It applies concepts from psychoanalysis, and the most prominent figures in psychoanalysis obviously is Freud and Lacan. We apply the concepts of them on literature, and the psychoanalytic literary theory asks, what do texts reveal about unconscious desires, repressions, and conflicts? The key insight is like literature is like a dream. It disguises what it really means. The reader, author, and characters all have unconscious dimensions. So this is not about pointing at a character and shouting penis ny, excuse the language, but that's what psychoanalysis revolves around. Though that stereotype persists, instead psychoanalytic criticism asks, what is the text not saying? I mean, generally we just look into the text and we just try to understand, but psychoanalytic theory tries to reverse this, and it says that instead psychoanalytic criticism asks, what is the text not saying? Where does it hesitate or contradict itself or repeat oddly? Those moments are like dream symbols. They point to repressed contents. Three possible focuses: the author, biographical approach, the character, the most common, or the reader. Why does this text disturb or thrill you? So every text has three, there are three possible focuses or three perspectives, we could say. The reader, the author, and the characters of that particular theory, for that particular text, sorry. So let's move on and see what a psychoanalytic theory has got core questions, or what does a psychoanalytic critic would ask. What is repressed in this text? What cannot be said directly? Question 2. How do characters enact Oedipal conflicts like desire for parent, rivalry with same-sex parent, etc.? That's the Oedipus complex, the Freudian theory. Um, what dream-like or uncanny elements appear, like repetition, doubles, bizarre transformations, etc.? How does the text language slip, condense, or displace meaning like a dream? I mean, it's the question about dream and the question about language are, or in a way, they are the same. I mean, what dream-like or uncanny elements appear, like repetition, doubles, bizarre, whatever we see in the dreams. Similarly, how does the text language slip, condense, or displace meaning, like with repetition or doubles or bizarre transformations? What is the impact of these elements on the text language? And what does the reader's anxiety or identification reveal about their own unconscious? I mean, obviously, reader when reading a text, he or she must have some kind of identity and something to conceal. So, what does the reader's anxiety or identification reveal about their own unconscious while reading that text? So these 5 questions will guide your analysis. The question 4, specifically dreamlike elements, psychoanalysis teaches us that the mind disguises its deep wishes. Literature does the same. When a character repeatedly encounters twins, doubles, or mirror images, that's not accidental. When a story loops back to the same event, that's repetition, compulsion. Your job basically is to decode the disguise. So what does reader's anxiety identification reveal? How does the text language slip and condense, displace meaning? And what are dream-like uncanny elements appear? So these are the keys for psychoanalytic critic to understand any text. So we need to keep these questions in our mind while, analyzing any text if we are trying to look into that text with the lens of psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic theory. So the key concepts in psychoanalytic theory are, once they are explained, we are in a better position to understand psychoanalytic theory. So the term unconscious is basically, that means hidden part of mind, which is repressed desires, memories, traumas, etc. So in order to understand psychoanalytic theory, we have to anchor these terminologies which are used in psychoanalytic theory. The unconscious is not just forgotten memories. It is actively repressed because those wishes are too threatening. There are certain wishes, according to psychoanalysis, which are too threatening, so they are repressed, and they are not forgotten memories. They are actively repressed because these wishes are too threatening or too dangerous to express. Repression, pushing unacceptable desires out of awareness. Right? The Oedipus complex, the Freud observed that young children develop desires for the opposite sex parent and rivalry with the same sex parent. He believed this was universal. On later on, critics in feminism and cross culture, they disputed this theory that it's something universal. the Freudian observation of desires for the opposite sex parent and rivalry with the same sex parent. It was greatly challenged by feminists and culturalists. But for literary analysis, the Oedipus complex appears wherever a story involves a son and a father figure or a daughter and a mother figure. Id, ego, and superego. Think of the id as toddler screaming, I want it now. Superego as the guilt tripping parent, and ego as the exhausted negotiator. Condensation is when multiple meanings. The dream work basically is how unconscious content appears in dreams. That is called condensation. Now, condensation is when multiple meanings collapse into one image. For example, a dream figure who looks like both your mother and your teacher. Displacement is when emotional intensity shifts from the real target to something harmless. The uncanny is something familiar that becomes strange and frightening, doubles, dolls, and repetition. So these are the main terminologies which are used in psychoanalytic literary theory or even in psychoanalysis. That is, the unconscious hidden part of mind, repressed desires, memories, traumas, repression, pushing unacceptable desires out of awareness, when we try to suppress or repress our uh, when we try to push unacceptable desires. Oedipus complex, child's unconscious desire for opposite sex parent and rivalry with the same sex parent. Like a boy is unconscious desire has an unconscious desire for his mother and another girl towards her father, and the rivalry of the same sex, like the boy has a rivalry with the father and the daughter has a rivalry with mother. So id, ego, superego, these three terminologies are often used in this psychoanalysis, and they are the key to understand this psychoanalysis. uh, Instincts. Id is basically instinct versus reality principle, that is the ego, whatever the reality is, whatever society is, versus internalized moral superego. So what are our moral goals? What are our moral ideals? They are basically the superego. The dream work, how unconscious content appears in dreams, condensation, that equals condensation. And as I said earlier, the condensation is basically is when multiple meanings collapse into one image. The dream work, how unconscious content, uh, condensation, fusing images and displacement, shifting emphasis. The uncanny, something familiar that becomes strange and frightening, like doubles, dolls, repetition. Displacement is when emotional intensity shifts from the real target to something harmless. Suppose if you are angry at your boss but dream about yelling at your dog, that's the displacement. That's the important. That's basically the uh, what it means by the uncanny, something familiar that becomes strange or frightening. Being angry towards your boss and dreaming about yelling on your dog at your dog. Moving on, we have uh, three major parts in psychoanalysis. Basically, part one, the author psyche. As I mentioned earlier, there are three aspects: the reader, the character, and the author. Uh, the Freudian basically perspective on literature is there are three major parts. Author psyche is reading the text as symptom, the writer's unconscious. The path is author psyche, the focus is reading the text as symptom, the writer's unconscious. And the example is that that could be expressed in this example that Shakespeare wrote Hamlet after his father's death. Another path that is character psyche, treating characters as a real people with unconscious conflict. And if you put that into an example, the Hamlet delays because of his Oedipal guilt. So what is Oedipus complex? You need to keep that in mind while analyzing this example. Hamlet delays because of his Oedipal guilt. And the reader's psyche is text triggers readers' repressed desires or anxieties. This is the text which basically, from reader perspective, the text triggers the reader's suppressed, uh, the reader's repressed desires or anxieties. And we can put that into example. Why are we fascinated by horror? Because why do we like horror movies or horror literature? Because that particular text or that particular part of literature triggers our repressed desires or anxieties, our fears. So Freud himself applied psychoanalysis to literature in these three ways. Author psyche readings are now less popular because they become biographical guesswork. Shakespeare must have missed his father. That's why Shakespeare wrote Hamlet after his father. The character psyche readings are what you will most often write treating Hamlet or Lady Macbeth as if they have inner lives. Hamlet delays because of his audible guilt. So it's character psyche is treating characters as real people, thinking real, striving beings. So that's how Freud tried to apply this character psyche on readings where what you'll most often write treating Hamlet or Lady Macbeth as if they have inner lives. And the third is reader psyche. The reader psyche readings ask, why do we enjoy tragedy? I mean, why do we like tragic movies or tragic novels or literature kind of things? Why does horror fascinate us? Freud would answer that literature lets us experience forbidden desires safely. Whatever we have desires, whatever our repressed desires are, we want to see them. We want to basically experience those forbidden desires safely in the text or in a literature. Uh, if you just brainstorm, you might think of or you might name a film character that have analyzed psychologically, and you can relate that to these three paths which Freud has developed. So Sigmund Freud, being the key proponent of psychoanalysis, he's basically the pioneer of psychoanalytic method. He was born in 1856 and died in 1939. The interpretation of dreams in 1900, a very important work. The Uncanny 1990, Oedipus in Hamlet. Freud argues Hamlet cannot kill Claudius because Claudius did what Hamlet unconsciously wanted, killed his father and married his mother. This is what uh, Freud's analysis is that in Hamlet, uh, Freud argues that in Hamlet cannot kill Claudius, the killer of his father, because Claudius did what Hamlet unconsciously wanted. So it was basically a suppressed desire of Hamlet, which was fulfilled by someone else, by Claudius. That's why he, he cannot kill Claudius. Uh, the interpretation of dreams and the uncanny feeling of dread when something is both familiar and strange. Dolls, doubles returning from the dead. So Freud's reading of Hamlet in the classic is the classic. On the surface, Hamlet delays revenge because he needs proof. But Freud asks, why does he pass up so many perfect opportunities?
تصرف
Please,
چی دیوس داخل پراش کنه او چیه که
please mute your mics,
ها
please.
بور که دا کالج که داخل نو کرد
Can you please turn your
کون
mic
کالج
off?
کی
Please take care when you're attending classes and just turn your mics off because it distracts us. So Hamlet delays, according to Freud, Hamlet delays revenge because he needs proof. But Freud asks, why does he pass up so many perfect opportunities? Claudius is praying Hamlet could kill him, but he doesn't. Why? Because Claudius has done what Hamlet secretly wishes, murdered the father and married the mother. To kill Claudius would be to kill the version of himself that wants those things. Hence the delay, not indecision, but unconscious guilt. This reading changes how we see the entire play. Ophelia's madness and death, displaced expression of Hamlet's own repressed desire. Feeling of dread when something is both familiar and strange. So literary legacy is any text with ghosts, doubles, amnesia, or compulsive repetition invites psychoanalytic reading. So we need to look into that part of literature or that text with the lens of psychoanalysis. So the famous line is the dream is the royal road that to the unconscious. For Freud, literature is also a royal road. It is similar like dream. The next key theorist in psychoanalytic critical theory or psychoanalysis is Jacques Lacan, who was born in 1901 and died in 1981. Lacan is harder, but he is harder but very crucial. He reread Freud through structural linguistics, uh, through Saussure and Jacobson. His famous claim is the unconscious is structured like a language. That means unconscious desires operate like metaphors and metonyms, substitution and continuity. The unconscious is structured like a language. There are three orders: the imaginary, pre-linguistic, infant bonded with mother's body, illusion of wholeness; the symbolic, entry into language, law, the name of the father, that is society, rules, and patriarchy; and the real, impossible, traumatic core that language cannot capture. The mirror stage, infant sees own reflection and misrecognizes it as a unified self. We spend our lives chasing this illusion. So infant sees own reflection and misrecognizes it as a unified self. This is what Lacan says, that we spend all of our lives changing this, chasing this illusion. We're trying to unify ourselves with that kind of reflection which is misrecognized by us. So this is how Lacan sees this literature. So Lacanian literary reading is characters are not people but positions in language. Desire is always desire for recognition from the other. Just mind you, I have received this warning from Zoom that our uh, free session is going to end soon. Once it ends, I'll relog in and I'll share the link again so that we can carry on and we can get psychoanalytic literary theory done. So as I said that Lacan is hard, very hard, but very crucial. So three orders. The imaginary is the infant's world of wholeness with the mother's body, no separation, no language. The symbolic is when the child learns language, enters the father's law, accepts that desire is always unsatisfied, and the real is the traumatic kernel that persists symbolization. So you can't say it, you can only circulate. Literature for Lacan is an attempt to symbolize the real and always failing. That failure is what we read. So basically, for Lacan, literature is is an attempt to symbolize the real. The real for us, whatever the real is, we try to symbolize it and always falling. So that failure basically is what we read according to Lacan. So the key concepts of Lacan's psychoanalytic theory is the terms desire for him, for Lacan, is not need, not demand. Desire is always for something missing. The object petite. The desire is for him, it's not something a demand, but something we are lacking, something we are missing. Uh, the gaze for Lacan is being looked at by the text, by language itself, not just watching. So it's not the gaze for him is just not just watching, but being looked at by the text itself, and by the language itself, not just watching. And the name of the Father for him is symbolic authority, that is law, prohibition, patriarchy, that structures the narrative. So the term, the name of the Father for him is a symbolic of authority. That authority could be law, prohibition, patriarchy, and that's what structures our narrative. And joyousness for him, the term he uses is excess pleasure that hurts, like trauma, horror, the sublime in literature, something in excessive pleasure that eventually hurts us. For literary critics, Lacan offers desire as a lack characters want not just objects but to be recognized by the other, love, authority, society. And the gaze, not just looking, but being looked at by the text, by the symbolic order. In horror movies, if you look closely, the monster gazes back. It's not like you just watch the monster. Monster gazes back. That's what he means, the gaze. The name of the Father for him, any authority figure who says no, that could be law, prohibition, social rules, patriarchy, or you name it. And the final term joyousness, that strange pleasure in pain. Why we rewatch tragic endings? Why we listen to sad music? The Portland letter, the Pauline's letter is Lacan's favorite example. The letter from him, a signifier, moves between characters and determines their positions regardless of its content. So if you look in, if I hope you must have watched the Harry Potter series, and if we look into the correct